Welcome to the Adult Bible Study with First Baptist Church of Gray City. My name is Charles. I'm one of our associate pastors, and we're going to be continuing on in our series in Isaiah chapter 46, verse 3 through 13. I hope you enjoy today's Bible study. Before we dive too deep into Isaiah 46, verse 3, we have to have a little bit of backdrop and understanding of what this verse is talking about and what the preceding verses from Isaiah 46, verse 3 through Isaiah 46 verse 13. And what we see is here in Isaiah 46 verses 1 and 2 helps give us this backdrop. And it tells us of Bel and Nebo. These are two different Babylonian gods. Bel, in fact, is actually Marduk, who is the number one god in Babylon, and he was the one that all the other gods bowed and worshiped to. And then Nebo was actually at this time considered the son of Marduk, and he was the number 2 god. And so you have the number 1 and the number 2 god in Babylon being depicted here, and the way that they're depicted is so telling by Isaiah, who says that they crouch and they cower, and they're depicted as being consigned to beasts and cattle, which means that they are carried by beasts and cattle. They're loaded onto these beasts and cattle as a burden for the weary animals. They cower. They crouch together, and they're not able to rescue the people, the Babylonians, from their burden. In fact, they can't even rescue themselves because they themselves go into captivity. This is the backdrop for what we're about to see in verse 3. And it says, listen. And this word listen is in the plural. The Hebrew is in the plural, emphasizing the need for all of the covenant people of God to listen within the house of Jacob, which is a way of saying the people of God. And the specific people that they're talking to is the remnant that have survived, which would be in itself the people of God, the house of Jacob, but they're the remnant who have survived the Babylonian exile. They're the remnant who have survived the devastation and the judgment that is coming by the hands of the Babylonians upon the house of Israel. And then it starts talking about God. And it says, because God is calling them to listen, who have been sustained from the womb and carried along since birth. This is set in stark contrast with what we just saw, the idols of Babylon. They cower, they crouch, they're a burden to their people and unable to rescue their burdens, and there even will be sent into captivity, where God sustains his people from the womb, from conception, and he carries them. And the word carry denotes carrying, supporting, providing for the basic needs. We have a picture of God carrying his people from their birth. Even when they were in the womb, he is caring for them. He is sheltering them from the day that they were conceived, from the moment God chose his people. And that's exactly what we see a few chapters earlier in Isaiah 44 verse 2. It says, this is the word of the Lord, your maker, the one who formed you from the womb. We have this picture of God as the one who formed the people of Israel, who made the people of Israel, and who brought them into being. And God is also saying that he is the one who will sustain and carry his people. He will be the one who cares for his people. This theme of being carried proceeds on through the next verse. Verse 4, I will be the same until your old age. I will bear you up when you turn gray. I have made you, I will carry you, I will bear you and rescue you. The phrase here, I will be the same, is literally in Hebrew, I am he, which tells us very similar to the Yahweh name of God. I am who I am. I am he. I am the same yesterday, today, and forever. There is no change within me, and I will be the same until your old age, or all the days of your life. And then he goes on with that carrying term, or that term of bearing them up. I will bear you up. This word bear means to carry, support, and implies putting a load on one's back that must be carried, telling us that the Lord will carry his people when you turn gray. When we're at our lowest point, our most feeble point, after we've been birthed, and he uses the similar language, but he's talking here about the womb and birth. And in verse 4, he goes on until our old age and we turn gray. The Lord is telling us that our entire lives, from the moment that we're born and we're fragile and small to the moment where we're feeble, old, and gray, He will be the one who sustains us. Even as our physical bodies give way, God will carry us. I have made you and I will carry you. Because again, just like we noted a moment ago, God chose His people. He is their maker. And He is the one who formed them from the womb, because He has chosen them, His servants. And He made you. And then He gives 4 terms. I will carry you, which emphasizes lifting and supporting and taking one's burdens away. This could even allude all the way to the taking away of sins. I will carry you. I will forgive and take away your burden, the burden of sin that is upon you. I will bear you. The same word that was used here that talked about carrying, supporting, and lifting a load, literally carrying His people, and He will rescue you. As opposed to the Gentile idols, the idols of Babylon who could do nothing physically, God will physically deliver His people. We see this born out in Jesus Christ, who physically comes to earth to deliver His people. But there's an immediate impact as well, that God will deliver His people from Babylon. And then the ultimate impact, where God will deliver us from sin and death. From here, Isaiah turns back to the rhetorical questions that he has been known to ask. And he asks the people of Israel, to whom will you compare me or make me equal? Who will you measure me with so that we should be like each other? These are rhetorical questions meant to be obvious. And the obvious answer to both of these questions is no one and nothing. There is nothing in heaven or on earth that compares to God. And it emphasizes the foolishness that it is for man to worship idols made by their own hands. And that's exactly where verse 6 takes us. Those who pour out their bags of gold and weigh out silver on scales. The sad reality of many of the people of Israel in this day is that they were people who poured out their money to lifeless statues. They're people who spent everything that they had. They weighed it out on scales and they poured it out to worship the idol made of gold or silver or wood or stone. And not only would they give their money, but they would give their money and they would hire a goldsmith to make into their god. They then turned from just pouring out their money to these lifeless statues to have to pay for someone to fashion it into the idol that they desire. And then the true danger of idol worship is borne out. Then they kneel and bow down to it. This is the true danger, because this is the true violation. Gold and silver, things fashioned into something, that has no bearing until we worship it. Until we pour out everything that we have and we assign it the thing that God deserves and only God deserves. And that is true worship. And why do we do this? Because idols give us what we want. They tell us that the sins that we desire are okay, and they press us to the point, and they allow us to do exactly what we want to do. Because again, they only have the power that we give them. Verse 7 starts to bear this out, because they lift it up on their shoulder and bear it along. This could potentially be talking about festival times when they would lift it up, carry it around the city, and then bring it back and set it down. But either way, the idol can do nothing except be lifted onto the shoulder of the people who are worshiping it and then set it in its place. And there it will stand, and it does not budge from its place. It cannot answer and it cannot save. This is the reality of our idols. This is the reality of when we worship something that is not God. We place on something that is created what only our Creator can do, which is to satisfy us, to bring us joy, to bring us hope, and to lift our burdens and our troubles from us. Because this is the sad reality of so many of the people of Israel. God calls them to remember. Remember and be brave. This command, just like the command earlier to listen, is in the plural, telling us that it's the entire people of Israel that he's calling to. And he's telling them, take it to heart. He's calling them to believe and to trust him, to remember the deeds that he has done. And he calls the people exactly what they are. You transgressors. He points to the rebelliousness of Israel, who had been taught God's ways, yet chose to rebel against it. And what are they to remember? They are to remember what happened long ago, referring to the many incredible acts of God in Israel's history, from the parting of the Red Sea to the plagues that were on Egypt, to how God provided for them in the wilderness, to the conquest of the land, the promised land, everything that God had done, always being there, always providing for them, never forsaking them. This is what God wants them to remember, all these things that have happened, because he is God and there is no other. There is no one like him. God is the sole God. There is no other. He is utterly unique because there is none like him. Verses 10 and 11 continue this assertion of God's uniqueness. The fact that God declared it from the beginning. And not only declared it, but declared the end. Declared exactly what would happen from the very beginning. And he's been doing this since the beginning. Genesis 12, 1 and 2 tells us about how the Lord had told Abram, who becomes Abraham, to go from your land, because God will be the one who makes you into a great nation and blesses you. And then he will bless all the peoples of the earth through you. This is exactly what God did and will do and has done through Jesus Christ, who is the seed from Abraham that ultimately blesses the entire world. God is utterly unique because from long ago, what is not yet done. God has been declaring from long ago, from the very beginning, what isn't even done yet. We see this even now, the declaration of Jesus Christ coming back. And we see the truth in it based on all the truths that come through Scripture. But yet it hasn't happened yet. But it will take place because God's plans will take place. I will do all my will. Nothing can stop God's plans. God's will is to do exactly what he says he will do. And there is nothing that he will leave out. Verse 11 tells us exactly how he's going to bring his people back from the land of Babylon. And he's calling out a bird of prey from the east. A bird of prey probably means that he's talking about a falcon or an eagle or even a vulture. And he's calling them out from the east. This is portraying Cyrus, the king of Persia, who will come from the east. And he is a man for my purposes from a far country. Persia was far away from Jerusalem, but it was for the purpose of God that he would bring them from the east and wipe out the Babylonians. This is spoken, which means that it will happen, and he will bring it about because it is part of his plan, and he will do it. We know historically that this is what happened. And this word planned, its root comes from the word to fashion, depicting a potter shaping and molding clay. And this is exactly what God does. God shapes and molds history to do exactly what he wants it to do. And in this scenario, it was to use the king of Persia, Cyrus, who was the most powerful king at that time, to wipe out the Babylonians and then allow the people of Israel to go back to Jerusalem. This means that this declaration about the people of Israel is good news, and that's exactly what we see in verses 12 through 13. Listen, again in the plural, talking to the entire people of Israel. You hard-hearted, far removed from justice, or this word could also mean righteousness, because they are far removed from the righteousness of God because of their stubborn and hard-hearted ways. The hard-hearted usually actually depicts someone of mighty heart. In this scenario, it's talking about stubbornness. And it says that I am bringing my justice near. He is bringing justice or righteousness back to his people. He's bringing justice for the wrongs that have been done by the Babylonians. And he's going to use the Persian army to wipe them out for the treachery and the wrong that they have done. It's not far away. God was aware of their plight and the struggle that they were going, and this justice he would bring. And he would bring salvation, and it would not delay because it is exactly God's timing. It was not stalled by anything. God brought it when he had said he would and when he planned. And then he would put salvation in Zion. The Zion typically depicts the temple, which means that he would bring salvation back to Jerusalem. And his glory, his splendor would be back in Israel. God's presence would again be with his people. What joyous news for the people of Israel in verses 12 and 13. And what joyous news for us today, because we have a true God who is incomparable, and he will complete his plan to save his people.
Welcome to the question and answer time. My name is Summer. I'm Pastor Charles' wife, and this week we are in Isaiah 46, and I just felt like I was having deja vu with some of the things that you were doing in the study, but I think it's just a matter of like the Lord has been teaching me some of these things lately, and I really love how he does that when he's teaching you something personally and the same message is coming through in a sermon. I always find that really convicting in the fact of I don't always see the big picture, but he does.
Yeah.
I wanted to kind of camp out and rest a little bit in verse 4, because as you were talking through verse 4, I literally got teary-eyed. So I'm going to just read it again. This is in the ESV. Even to your old age, I am he, and to gray hairs I will carry you. I have made and I will bear. I will carry and will save. I don't know if it's just as I've gotten older, I have met just more people that have run their race with endurance and get to their 90s and they still love Jesus and they love him more than they did yesterday. There was just something so beautiful. I feel like sometimes as people, it's really hard to be a caregiver. But we see like that is the heart of the Lord here. Yeah. And how like he knows us from before day one, but even, day one we come into this world and he knows every day of our life and he's with us at the end and he's carrying us. And that just like struck my heart, the beauty of that. Yeah. And so I don't necessarily have a question in that outside of I was just really challenged of, man, the Lord is big. If he knows all the days of my life and even when I'm old, he is caring for me and he's so eternal. Like, I think that's what I got out of that verse. It shows like my life is really temporary, but he is eternal.
Yeah, he's the same. I mean, I am he is very similar to Yahweh, I am who I am phrase. And then you have it in combination with verse 3 there, which I brought out in the Bible study where it talks about, you have been born by me from before your birth, carried from the womb. I mean, like the combination of, like, I was with you from the moment of your conception all the way through your birth, and then I carried you from your birth, and now even in your old age, when your hair is gray, I'm carrying you, I'm bearing you up, I'm literally placing you on my back and moving forward with you. Like that whole, I mean, that's the imagery that you're supposed to get is like the Lord is putting a load on to carry you. And I mean, how much is that like Jesus, who says, my yoke is easy, my burden is light. Like trade out your burdens with me. Let me carry your burdens. And you carry my easy and light yoke.
Which is just so sweet. And then it's almost in, I wouldn't say sarcastic contrast, but I do think there's times where you read the word and it's so ironic. And so here, just a few verses later, the idol can't move. it's put in its place
Oh, yeah.
and it's stuck there. And here we have the Lord on the move carrying his people to finish the race well.
I would actually say that it is sarcastic.
Yeah.
I think Isaiah was, very much pulling out the sarcasm of how ridiculous it is for us to put our burdens or try to place our burdens on something that's completely lifeless.
Something
we
that
can't do
we've made.
Yeah, something that we've made that has no ability to truly withstand the weight of our burdens. And yet God is so willingly and desirous for us to place our burdens on him. And so I want to challenge any of you who are watching this video, wrestle through that. What does it mean for you to place your burdens on him? For you to allow him to carry you, just like he's saying that he will carry the people of Israel, because now we are the people of God. Believers in Jesus Christ, those who place faith in Jesus Christ, who is true Israel. Now we must place our faith in him, and through placing faith in him, he carries our burdens. He carries us as his people. I just want to challenge you. How are you placing your trust in the one who will carry your burdens for you? We hope that you've enjoyed this study, and we look forward to doing the next one with you.